So, hey everybody, my name is Pekka Kallioniemi. I come from Finland. And first of all, thank you again for this invitation. It's my first time in Kosovo and I love it so far, especially the food is so good. Yeah, maybe briefly about me. So, my research focuses on Russian disinformation and information operations, especially in the West, targeted at West. I have been doing for almost 3 years a series called Vatniksup, which is social media series on Russian and pro-Russian propagandists and their narratives. So basically my research focuses on that. It just on the 19th of this month it came out also as a book, and well, basically I'll be talking today about Russian disinformation and propaganda on social media. So hope you enjoy it. I know it's been a really long day and the draw of the mobile phone is strong, but if there's something important I can start singing, so you'll know. Just kidding. Then everybody would leave. But okay, so I'll just start here. I come from academia, so I want to define just the terminology a little bit. First of all, I would like to state, this is my opinion, but I think we are at war with Russia. We are at war in the West. We are at information war against Russia. They are extremely aggressive. This war has been going on for easily over 10 years. And what's part of the war is these information operations, which is organized activity where one party attempts to affect the public opinion and behavior of individuals and policymakers, which then affects the society or a community as a whole. So basically it's a bigger picture. So these are operations in a what I call information war. Effective information operations have a polarizing effect on a society or community. So the goal is often to divide. They are long-term activity, so it's not basically just week or two of operations, but it could be measured in easily in years, even decades. And today, most information operations rely heavily on the internet and especially social media. So yeah, polarizing effect, I think it's something that's worth mentioning, especially in the United States, where you have this two-party system, and you know how the American politics is basically just saying how the other party sucks. So it's a very lucrative environment for this kind of operations. But it also works in a multi-party system, naturally. And then disinformation. There's a lot of talk about disinformation. Disinformation, like it's the biggest problem of our society. Like I think it's WHO stated. But yeah, I try to bring up this kind of academic definition. So intentionally misleading information is, in my view, disinformation. So basically, somebody who spreads a narrative that they know to be false is spreading disinformation. Misinformation is a little bit different. You can do it unintentionally. Misinformation is, okay, there is a lie that Ukraine is ruled by neo-Nazis, and you actually think this and you spread it. That's misinformation. So there are biolabs in Ukraine, true. Disinformation often works with half-truths. So this is the true part. And then you have the disinformation, you have the lie added to it. So where Ukrainians are developing biological weapons with support from the US. And this is an actual statement from TASS from 2022 when Russia was claiming that bioweapons labs that there are bioweapons labs where biological weapons are developed against the Russian population in collaboration with the US. And then you can even add a bigger lie on this. So these weapons include combat insects, so mosquitoes, that allegedly will be used to infect Russian troops with hazardous contagious diseases. So you can make it always, you can always add on top of that, you can make it even crazier, and on social media it doesn't really matter because it can still work, and it often does. There is a name for this Russian system on how they operate online. It's called Firehose of Falsehood, and it's basically, it works on high volume, and it works on multi-levels. It works on multi-channel. So basically every social media site you know, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or X, whichever you want to call it, these operations are ongoing there. And the idea of high volume is that you basically push so much narratives and comments and so on, that it's very difficult to figure out where they're coming from, what is the content of it, and what is kind of the reasoning behind them. There's no problem in telling lies, broadcasting lies. That is very common, and there is no commitment to any consistency. You can predict yourself. It's very common to kind of put two predicting narratives because it also has a very polarizing effect. Point is not to persuade. It's not really a brainwashing operation per se. It's to confuse and overwhelm. If we have 7 different narratives on who blew up the Nord Stream, this will confuse general population, and it creates this kind of thinking mentality that who can you trust? Nobody has the time to go through all these materials, so it's very difficult to kind of fact check 7 different narratives. And it works really well in a low trust environment, and it lowers it further. This is very important. So societies where people don't generally trust the media, the decision makers, the authorities, this kind of system works really well because basically, for example, the state has it's very difficult for the state to kind of debunk this kind of information because the trust is so low. Number of arguments matter more than the quality, so it doesn't really have to be high quality narratives. And the idea is that because the volume is so big, you drown out any actual competing messages or counter narratives. And this is very much being used. It's been used for I would say since 2012, and it's still a very valid tactic, and it's now being used by other malign actors too. And why do we always talk about Russia? This is basically the scope of it. So 61% of foreign influence efforts are conducted by Russia. This is a study from 2023. And according to another study, Russia was responsible for 80 of foreign influence efforts in Europe. This is staggering. This is like, if you think that 4 out of 5 efforts are coming from Russia, that's pretty big. Troll farms reached 140 million Americans a month on Facebook before the 2020 US presidential election. I would imagine that this number for 2024 will be even bigger. But also, we are kind of blind to all this. So, of course, in Europe we always talk about Russian disinformation, but we forget that it's often in regions that we really don't... So, like Africa, Global South. Russia's information operations over there are huge. So in Africa, basically, some countries, RT or Sputnik is the state media, basically. They are one of the most popular radio channels or TV channels, and this infrastructure is, of course, supported by the Chinese. So it's a very, very sophisticated system. Also, RT is extremely popular in South America. So we are kind of too focused on the problem in the US or in the North America and in Europe, whereas Russia has already a long time ago expanded these efforts to new regions. And also it's a very asymmetrical, I think somebody talked about this, that war is always asymmetrical. But in this case, I see it's a very asymmetrical system because Russians have to rely on the truth. It's always the Western media that does the kind of debunking, the fact-checking, and it's kind of expected from us. They invest heavily in these operations. We are always kind of underdogs when it comes to funding. And of course, they can always heavily censor their own media, so this kind of back and forth is very difficult. So most social media sites are either closed or heavily slowed down in Russia, or they have their own version, like for TikTok. And yeah, even planning protests, you show an empty white paper in the Kremlin, and you'll be arrested. So in many ways it's a symmetrical system. And then, of course, polarization is still very much the goal of Russian disinformation. And it's often done by provoking conversations around these big controversial topics that invoke very strong emotions. I'm sure people from this region can come up with many things, for example, including minorities, where this discussion could happen. Immigration is very commonly used for this. COVID vaccinations was a very popular topic before the full-scale invasion. Climate change, of course, social movements like Black Lives Matter. So there is actually research done that the Russian media kind of promoted both sides of like pro-Black Lives Matter and anti-Black Lives Matter. And this is very common because if you create this kind of division, it further kind of increases the polarization. And the medium that they often use is social media. And why? Social media is already a very integral part of our lives. We use it for finding love, we use it for finding work, we use it for finding a political candidate. Basically, almost every decision is supported by social media or algorithms. And these big tech companies, they hold a lot of data on us, which is also interesting because I heard about these embassies that are done like for big tech companies alone. And often we talk about how much money they make, but also we should talk about how much data they have on our lives. And of course, this is also why they can make so sophisticated estimates on our emotions, our desires and dislikes. So there's commonly people say that TikTok is the best social media because it has the best algorithm. It can give you the best content. And this is because they collect so much data on us. At some point, they were even collecting fingerprint data on people and hijacking the camera. So you can collect these vast amounts of data and then you can use that to kind of turbo boost the algorithm, make it even better. Also, social media or online world has this kind of, it's very cold in a way, but it invokes a lot of emotions. It invokes a lot of primitive emotions like anger, disgust, of course joy too. But so we are often like highly emotional when we are online, but what's missing is kind of what I call the soul. This is not any academic term, please don't use it in that context, but it's like we are here, we are discussing with each other, there is lot of this non-verbal communication going on, and I think it's more warm. But when you go online, it's like this cold environment where arguments are much more common than in real life. So this doesn't show fully, but basically this graph shows what you can get for 10 euros on different social media platforms. So if you have 10 euros, I don't know how many of you are on Instagram. If you want to buy 25,000 likes, I don't know, I've never had 25,000 likes on Instagram. I'll pay 10 euros and I'll get it. So this is basically all social media platforms can be manipulated. They can be manipulated with money. What you see on social media, what you see online is often inflated. It's artificially inflated. It can be done with money. It's not real. So these are not real people, but if you think of psychology, it still works. If you see something that has 10 million views, you will look at it because you think that it's something important. The big numbers make us much more interested in this. So this social media manipulation is working. We all know that it's happening, but we kind of ignore it in many ways. So the social media engagement numbers cannot be trusted. Okay, so if we talk more about Russia, Russia sets the agenda right now. They are telling the stories and we are reacting. We are always one step behind. So if we go through the examples on the left is the MH17. It didn't take Russia a long time to come up with the first version of what happened. So it was a Ukrainian jet. They came up with this Photoshop image that it was a Ukrainian jet that shot down MH17. Of course, it was the separatists or the Russia-supported separatists and Ihor who actually did it with the Russian book system. But it doesn't really matter because this is something that stuck in people's mind. They told the first story. Nord Stream, it didn't take them very long time to come up with this story that was published by Seymour Hersh, that it was the CIA and it was Norway. So they did it. So this pretty quickly came to be. Another one was the Mariupol theater bombing. So basically, I think there were at least 3 different stories. One of them was that it was the Ukrainians who bombed the theater, but there were many contradicting stories, and most of them came from Russian sources, of course. So they set the agenda, and then the West reacts. So yeah, if we talk about this operation, information war, Russia is waging against Western democracies. There are some key events that these are events that I consider to be the kind of milestones. Of course, 2012, 2013, Yevgeny Prigozhin's Internet Research Agency and creation of these troll farms, which turned social media commentary into a factory line, basically. They worked in shifts, and you had a quota. You had to write 100 comments a day that kind of put out negative commentary on the West, positive on Russia, but mostly negative on the West. So criticism towards the West, and of course Ukraine. 2014, massive hacking, of course, and disinformation campaign after MH17 that happened in the Netherlands. And even like the MH17 campaign as a whole was a very big key event. And it was also, I think, so what we got from there is of course Bellingcat, which is now one of the kind of pioneers in debunking Russian bullshit. I can say bullshit because it's an actual academic term now. So, 2016, of course, this is probably one of the biggest. So, meddling in the Brexit vote and the U.S. presidential elections, this is very big. So, the Mueller report concluded that Russians did indeed, the GRU did indeed meddle with the vote. And then, of course, large-scale information war against Ukraine and NATO, 2021 to today. Of course, it started long before in case with Ukraine, but it's just ramped up massively. And there's actually an interesting anecdote on this. So around 2009, 2010, Russia, like in the domestic market, they created these revisionist history science fiction books, which always showed Ukraine as the enemy. And they had these crazy stories where Hitler and Stalin fought together against Ukraine, and it was this like whole genre of fiction books that always showed USA and Ukraine as the enemy. And they were like war books. And then, of course, 2024, Russia state funding of social media super spreaders via shell companies, which I will talk more now, I guess. Yes, so case study. How many of you have heard of Tenet Media? Raise your hand. Okay, so I will briefly explain what happened. So just maybe a month ago, there was an indictment against two RT, which is a Russian state media employees. They funneled $10 million to American YouTubers, big YouTubers, who are pictured there, some of them. The influencers were told to spread anti-Ukraine messages online. They produced YouTube videos, and this money was funneled via Czech and United Arab Emirates and Turkish companies to Tennessee-based Tenet Media. And these influencers were paid $100,000 to $400,000 per month for these videos, so it's quite a lot of money. And I think maybe here's one example of such video. I hope we have sound. Or not?
This is psychotic. Ukraine.
I'll put it from the beginning.
And they know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong, I know. You've got criminal elements of the US government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
So that's the content. That's the type of content that was published by Tim Pool, who is the guy here, after he was paid $400,000 a month. Pretty damning in my view. Of course, these people themselves said that they didn't know that they were spreading Russian disinformation. But I mean, if you say things like that, I don't know. But anyway, that was Tenet Media. And this brings me to social media super spreaders, which is basically what I research now. These are large social media accounts that have a high engagement. So a lot of, for example, if they do a lot of videos, these videos have a lot of views. We can talk about 100,000 millions of views, lots of comments, likes, shares. These people are often idolized by their followers. So people who kind of watch this content, they often believe these people. And by the way, Tim Pool, who was in the video, he was covering Euromaidan in 2014, where he was very pro-Ukraine, but something changed along the way. Maybe it's the money, maybe it's not. And they often share emotional polarizing content because that also brings in the big numbers with views and so on. And there's also lots of disinformation and gossip. So just some people, some of these super spreaders just make things up, basically. And this is like, they don't have any sources and they just come up with stuff. Okay, so this is from a leak that came from a Russian troll farm. And this is world's richest man, Elon Musk, sharing a meme made in a Russian troll farm. So I used translation to translate from Russian, but basically the biggest super spreader in the world could be Elon Musk could be considered to be that person. And there's also one interesting detail here. So if you look at the text here, there's the first name there, Diana Panchenko. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Diana, but she is Ukrainian. She used to work for Viktor Medvedchuk, who is kind of a Putin ally, also Yanukovych ally, and she is now, I think she's in Dubai, but she's producing a lot of anti-Zelensky content. Basically, that's her only thing, is anti-Zelensky. And recently she also attacked me, but she is mentioned in this particular Russian leak as a person who should be taught how to use the Russian system. So this is a clear kind of evidence that she is heavily involved in these troll farms, this was an interesting find in my view. Okay, I've been giving a lot of negative stuff here, so what's the solution? This is my view. I like the Finnish system because it's basically addressing the issue. So media literacy at early age. So basically in Finland we start the idea of talking about disinformation already at preschool. We talk about the consequences of lying through stories and so on. Free press, of course, who can freely criticize decision making and politics. I think in a free country you should be even able to produce in some ways like pro-Kremlin views, and it shouldn't be censored. But yeah, this is another discussion. Multi-channel approach. I think every state who wants to effectively fight disinformation should also cover different platforms, social media included, TikTok, X, whatever, Facebook. I think you should, states should be present in all of these, or at least understand how they work. Research on future of disinformation or future of journalism, how the landscape is changing, how AI is changing the whole field. And the goal is to increase trust in society and to its authorities and decision makers. So I already talked about how in low trust environment, these Russian strategies, they work particularly well. So if we can increase this trust, they don't work so well. And also is something that in Finland we often talk about is the security of information. So I don't know, maybe you know about security of supply. So when a country is at war, in Finland we talk a lot about what can we get from our own country, like food, energy, and so on. This is security of supply, and we pay a lot of attention to this in Finland, but we also pay attention to the security of information. So how can we secure that foreign malign influence in case of war is not kind of coming into the information space? How can we protect the information space, yet still keep it free? I think that's a very interesting thing. And here is, we can see up there is a state media. So this is like a Finnish broadcasting company is up there. The trust in this institute is 85%. So 85% people consider it trustworthy. At the bottom you have the yellow press, which is not a surprise. But I mean, this also tells how high the trust to kind of government news media is in Finland. Okay, so this is a picture from. How many of you heard of this Canadian convoy event? Raise your hand. Okay, a few. So in Canada there was this convoy event, which was basically protest against COVID-19 mandates. And they decided to do the same event in Finland, and it was very popular. So I think around 15,000 people attended. And this was basically all the conspiracy theorists and the pro-Kremlin people and people against COVID-19 vaccines and mandates were at this event. This was 2 weeks before Russia launched their full-scale invasion. 2 weeks, and it's quite big event, almost as big as when Finland wins the ice hockey world championship, but not quite. And this is 2 months after that. This is after the full-scale invasion. This is an anti-NATO demonstration. So something happened after Russia launched their full-scale invasion in Ukraine. This kind of, the whole conspiratorial gang in Finland, it kind of, it's almost like the emperor's new clothes were like, everybody saw what they really were, and the whole scene was kind of destroyed after the full-scale invasion. And this was after, I think this was after Finland declared that there would be a NATO application. So it's 7 people plus the photographer. They couldn't get any more people. So coming from this to this in just a matter of a few months, I think it's something happened in the Finnish society. And then I would like to talk briefly about Ukraine. I don't know how much time do I have, but I'll try to be brief. This is actually from a paper from a good friend and colleague, Jakub Kalensky. They interviewed Ukrainian journalists and activists, and they came up with this 10-point system, how Ukraine fights Russian disinformation. I list 7 of those here. So you need a solid foundation, you need organizations, you need to build it up from the bottom up. So you have to actually make an effort to create these organizations and create the resistance. And numbers do matter. Russian disinformation machinery is massive. It is massive. They outsource a lot of stuff, so they have troll farms in Africa, in many African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and so on. They also have those in Philippines. They collaborate with the Chinese, and Iran. So it's a massive system, so you need the numbers. You need enough people to actually focus on debunking these false narratives. Overlap is okay. I mean, 2 organizations can be working on same thing, and it can still create a very good result. And I think this is also very important to cherish the civil society. So for example, on X/Twitter, there is this very active society that works against Russian disinformation with their own weapons. So it's called NAFO, and whenever embassy account or pro-Kremlin account comes up with the narratives, they are being ridiculed. They are just being laughed at. They are being thrown with memes. They are not taken seriously. And this is what Russia has been doing for 10 plus years, and now it's being used against them, and it's extremely effective. So civil society plays a big role in fighting online disinformation. Humor is a very big part of this. And information war it's never ending. The enemy will always be there. It's not something like a conventional or kinetic war you have. Eventually you will have a peace treaty or in information war it doesn't end when the conventional warfare ends. And the West needs to catch up with Ukraine. I mean, I will tell this to everybody, that basically we are still the underdogs, and we will be the underdogs unless something like drastic is being done. There needs to be resources for this, because this is destroying societies from the inside, and it is decreasing the cohesion of communities and societies. I think one example of this is the US, and I think the military aid to Ukraine was delayed for around 6 months because they were fighting about the border. And what was Russia doing during this? They were, of course, talking about the border. They were kind of amplifying these narratives. They are real narratives. Of course, there's a problem with the border, but Russia was kind of also throwing gas at the flame. So they were making this problem seem much bigger than it actually is. And they all did all this online, on social media. Then I'm going to give out a few examples of hybrid operations. So when I talk about hybrid operations, I talk about combination of real-world events with social media campaigns. So, for example, you send protesters somewhere that have pro-Kremlin signs or some signs that have a message, and then you try to make this go viral online. So you have this double effect. It might go into news and so on. And maybe some of you already have heard of this doppelganger group, a Russian group that have done this a lot. So just some examples. After the Hamas terrorist attack on 7th of October, there was a group of Moldovan people who painted graffiti of Stars of David around France. And this made the news, of course, but it also became this kind of narrative of anti-Semitism in Europe, and of course it was also amplified very heavily on social media. Another case was, I think they were Moldova again, or Bulgarian people who laid fake coffins in Paris of French soldiers after French said that they would have boots on the ground in Ukraine. Again, very heavily amplified on social media. So it's this combination of real-world event. It can be orchestrated and then combining it with a massive campaign online. Some more examples on the left is this is from the United States. It's from 2023, I think, February. It's a Rage Against the War Machine event. So what you see in the picture is, of course, supporters of imperialistic Russia, but the lady in pink is actually a peace advocate from an organization called Code Pink. So they kind of combine these organizations from the far left and, of course, also from the far right. And on the right, this is from a Danish investigation. So Russia hired 4 people to go around different protests around Europe and kind of speak against the NATO membership of Finland and Sweden, or just in general anti-NATO, anti-America. So these are all same people. They go to big protests that are unrelated. It could be about climate change, and they take these pictures and then they try to make them go viral online. And they, of course, also use these Nazi salutes and so on to kind of make a bigger effect. So completely orchestrated again, just paid these people to do this. But also often when you try to mobilize people online, it doesn't really reflect well upon the real world. So in the left, there was an attempt by a pro-Russian individual to kind of create a rally in support of Russia. And the group had 50,000 people attending, and this is the end result. It was actually there was one person there, and the rest are journalists who came to cover the story, so nobody came. And this is, so if we go back, this picture on the left, Rage Against the War Machine, it was relatively popular in 2023. They tried to do it again. That's the picture on the right. So it was also a massive failure, even though they put quite a lot of money in it. So it doesn't always kind of transfer from the virtual world to the real world, also because these stories are amplified by bots and trolls and accounts that are not real. So things often seem much bigger online than they actually are in the real world. And then, of course, the migration crisis that is being also, that's probably I would say that it's the second most popular narrative online right now. The first one from Russia. The first one would be how corrupt Ukraine is and how all aid should be stopped. But this is probably like anti-immigration and pro-immigration narratives. And we know that there's still a very big issue on the border of Latvia and Poland, Lithuania. In Finland, there's not right now because the border is completely closed, but there was this big risk of Russia sending immigrants from countries like Somalia to Finland to flood the system. Okay, and then we should always remember that the media landscape is ever changing. It's very hard to keep up. Even as a researcher, it's very hard to keep up with the changes that are happening in the digital world. So in Finland, half of 13 to 18-year-olds get their news from TikTok. That is their main news source. Of course, they also read yellow press. They also read. They watch TV and so on. But still, it's still like TikTok. It's how do we perceive TikTok? For me, it's a place where you watch silly dances or meme videos. But some people will get their news from there. And what are these news? What are the news? They're often extremely sensationalized versions of what actually happened or just guesstimates. And this kind of short form video with neutral approach is the preferred format. So even if you put this on YouTube, the young people, nobody will watch it. So it's like, okay, you have to say what you kind of want to say in 1 minute maximum. That's already a very long video on platforms like TikTok. And youth is moving towards these more social and interactive media where you can get the basic idea very quickly. And this is also something that we have to kind of realize and we have to act upon it. And then one more thing. So 2017, Putin said the nation that leads in AI will be the ruler of the world. And this is very much the case. We can see now already on social media, AI is being used to mimic real people, mimic real engagement, comments, and so on. And it is actually working. It's getting better and better. We know that how quickly, for example, ChatGPT has evolved, and it keeps on evolving. So this is a very good prediction. Of course, it was done by the US and President Xi a long time ago. But just to kind of I wanna conclude the presentation with this video, which kind of demonstrates the effect. This is actually a very old video already. So
the PSA. You can't believe anything you see these days. These glasses aren't even real. Neither is my face. All this stuff was 3D tracked on using these dots that I drew on with this marker. Actually, the marker isn't real either. Neither is the background. Or my face. Have a good night.
So, we are coming to a point where it's very difficult to trust any media online. Is it video, photos, textual? It's very difficult to trust what we see, what we hear, and this will, of course, create even more kind of. This is for me. This is a recipe for a low trust environment. It will kind of drive this thinking, and it's a real challenge, and it needs to be addressed. Right now, I would say that not many nations or societies are actually addressing it, but it should be. So I conclude here. Thank you.